everyone, welcome back to Dreamscape Horsemanship. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we're going to talk about hobble breaking your horse. It doesn't really matter the age of the horse. It's pretty much the same steps. So standing with me is 4-year-old Abby. She's going to be our lovely little demo horse for today. So this video is actually going to accompany a little bit of a kind of an article or a further tutorial I'm going to do on the equipment itself and kind of how to pick a pair of hobbles, how to go through the groundwork training your horse. But I figured for those of you that prefer an actual demonstration or an actual video, then we're going to have that too. So you get asked a lot as a trainer kind of what the practical uses of hobbling your horse are. And for a lot of people, and sometimes even myself, I kind of prefer not to hobble a horse if I can. Obviously, you want to try and go through the groundwork and try and do whatever it is that you're trying to solve instead of hobbling. But sometimes you need that little bit of extra. I'm getting a little nervous here. The wind's coming up outside and got all the doors open today. So sometimes you just need a little bit of extra that hobbling kind of allows you to get accomplished. So there are probably 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different kinds of hobbles, but they all pretty much do the same thing. So when you're hobble breaking a horse, really what you're teaching them is to give to pressure and accept things around their legs, around their feet. Particularly, you want to make sure they can give to pressure around their pastern, because generally that's where you hobble. Some people will hobble further up the leg, almost to mid-cannon bone or fetlock. The problem I have with that is, depending on the kind of hobbles you're using, if the horse really struggles, they're going to hurt themselves, because along the back of the cannon bone and both, like you have the splint bones on the inside of the cannon bone, you have the sensitive tendons and ligaments that run down the back of the cannon bone. I can see that being okay if your horse is super well broke to hobbles, but when you're definitely kind of hobble breaking and in the beginning stages, I prefer to use the pastern as kind of the point to hobble a horse. And obviously with them being able to give to the pressure of the hobbles and learn that they're not completely restricted to the fact that they can't move at all. Hobbled horses, especially if you hobble them a certain way, they still have a fair, decent amount of movement that they can do. Basically, they have to learn to shuffle instead of taking their usual great big stride. So that's great. Probably the biggest use of hobbles that you'll see is when people go packing or hunting or even just for a weekend or a week-long trail ride. And sometimes you don't have the option, depending on where you're going, to highline tie, which if you're at a camp, then sometimes highlining is possible. If you're out in the backcountry, especially around Alberta, you go into a lot of the national parks, they actually have a rule that you can't highline tie your horses because they don't want you to damage the trees or whatever you happen to be highlining your horse to. So then, what the parks expect you to do is to have your horse hobble broke and to let them graze while you're at camp. The nice thing about, sorry, there's a bunch of bees that have come in here. Another kind of benefit of hobble breaking your horse if you're going to go in the mountains with them is for the 6, 7, 8, for the amount of time you're in camp, do you really want to have your horse tied with their head to a tree? At least hobbling allows them to move around camp a little bit. They can still move to an extent. You're not going to have them galloping off if they're hobble broke correctly. And they're still able to graze and wander around, go drink some water, and then from a maintenance standpoint, while you're in camp, you're able to enjoy time with your friends, your family, whoever you happen to go out with. You can, prepare your meals, you can do this and do that without necessarily having to worry that your horse might be 7 miles down the trail or on its way back home. And the maintenance level is a little bit lower if your horse is able to kind of shuffle around camp and graze as they please. So generally the horses end up being happier too because they're allowed to do kind of as nature intended, with a little bit of restricted movement, and they're not tied to a tree all night, which is great. Another super awesome benefit of having your horse hobble broke, not necessarily when they're wearing the hobbles, but it helps a lot when the horse happens to get a foot caught in the fence or in the bucket or in the hay feed or whatever they happen to get their feet tangled up in. They learn not to panic. which, especially if it's barbed wire or plank board fence, you know, something where if they're going to thrash and panic and cause quite a scene, they're going to hurt themselves and it's going to be a wreck. For horses that are hobble broke, generally, when they happen to get into that situation, they don't panic. They think, oh, okay, you know, maybe I'm hobbled. And they will stand there and either wait for you to come help them, or they will figure out enough that they'll move their feet around in enough of a fashion that they will eventually get themselves out without having to panic. Which is great. Your vet bills are going to be lower. Your property isn't going to be destroyed every time your horse happens to catch themselves if they do. And it's much more beneficial to the horse because they're not going to hurt themselves, they're not going to get scared. And obviously, like to me, why wouldn't you hobble break a horse? That alone should be enough of a benefit for you to want to go through these groundwork exercises. And then you come into kind of the more practical herd management kind of safety things, which is kind of the reason I hobble broke Abby when she first got here. You can use hobbles if you have a horse that's really, really difficult for the farrier. You can hobble them, providing the horse is hobble broke. And that generally keeps the farrier, the handler, and the horse a heck of a lot safer. If you have a mare that's trying to kick her foal, or you want to have that mare accept her foal a little bit more, or maybe you just have a horse out in the pasture that you might not have the facility or the space to be able to separate that horse, but they're beating up all the other horses, you can hobble them so that they can't kick out at the other horses. And I'm not saying that that's kind of the thing you do permanently, it's just a training step that you use, because obviously you're not going to be able to stand in the pasture all day correcting the horse every time he happens to do something wrong. Obviously when you have the time, you're out there doing the groundwork, but for the time where you can't necessarily be supervising that particular horse, you kind of have to be able to do something so that they're still being trained not to perform those certain behaviors while you're out doing kind of the rest of the work that you have to do. So the reason I hobble broke Abby, and kind of the reason behind why I'm making this video, is because when Abby came in, her owners had warned me that she liked to jump the fence. They didn't really know why. They figured that she was just getting bored, which is a complete possibility. She had been away, one of the other horses, Cash, you've seen in some of the other videos, the gray Percheron cross. He's been here for almost a month now, and he was a pretty good buddy with Abby when they were at home. They both come from the same farm. And I noticed when I put them together again, because we have only so much space, I have to be able to have horses that can get along with each other. And then when I went to take Cash away from her again, after she had been here for a day and they had gotten reacquainted, she didn't come running at the fence, but she came up to the fence and she picked up her legs and she kind of tried to jump the fence at a standstill when I tried to take Cash away. We got about 15, 20 feet down the pathway before I turned back to kind of check and see what she was doing. So that first day I was able to have somebody kind of supervise and keep her away from the fence. After Cash was out of eyesight and kind of out of the way and she didn't see him, she calmed down and because there was another horse that was still up there with her, she calmed down, she went back to eating her hay. But for the days that I obviously don't have that extra set of eyes to be able to keep an eye on her, I'm in the arena, the pens are outside, up the driveway a little bit. I don't have the ability to be able to supervise the work I'm doing in the arena with some of the other young horses and be able to keep an eye on her at the same time. So there's a few different safety issues that could arise with that. If somebody's not able to watch her, she could potentially get hung up in the fence because the fence is 6 foot. And the way she was trying to jump the fence, she was basically trying to climb it. And in that scenario, she's either going to be able to hop over it and be okay, and then in that case, she'd probably try and find out where Cash went. She'll probably come down to the arena, or she'll just hang out in the yard. But we don't really want that because it's an open yard. She can decide that she's walking 5 miles down the road while I'm not watching her. Or she could get hung up in the fence. On either side of the fence, she could get 1, 2, 3, maybe all 4 legs stuck in the fence. It's a plank board fence. There's not quite a foot between each, like a foot width space between each board. If she gets hung up, she's going to panic, she's going to thrash, she's going to hurt herself, she's going to wreck the fence, she's going to spook the other horses around her and potentially cause a further wreck with the other horses. And obviously an injured horse, I can't do my job, she's injured, you know, the owners have a vet bill. There's just a whole list of things that I don't want to deal with. So I thought the next possible course of action was going to be to put her in a stall. Well, she actually tried exactly the same thing once I brought another horse into the equation, which happened to be Cash as well. So that's when I decided that for her safety, because climbing the stall walls can be just as dangerous as climbing the fence, she could get a foot caught in the rails, the bars of the stall once she gets up to a certain height. And that could actually be even more dangerous than being caught in the fence outside, because she's basically suspended higher in the air than she would be if it was just the fence outside. So they're in these pens for a little bit longer. Probably in another 3-4 days, I'm going to move them down to an electro braid fence. So we'll see if she kind of figures out that she can't come up to the fence and try and climb it like that with the electro braid. But in the meantime, I had to do something. So yesterday, I had gone through the groundwork and Hobble broke her, and I figured that it would be a good time, because she's at that stage of training, to kind of make this video and show you guys kind of what goes through, how to go through the process of Hobble breaking your horse. And then I have 2 pairs of hobbles that you can kind of use in 3 ways. So I guess kind of I have 3 sets of hobbles if I use both of the sets together. So I will kind of show you how I went through the little bit of groundwork. I will hobble her to show you kind of what you do once there's a pair of hobbles actually on the horse. And I'll kind of show you the 2 different sets of hobbles that I have. And then if you want to know more about hobbles themselves and further detail on all the groundwork, you can go check out the article that I'll link in the video, and then this video will be linked in the article as well. So I'm just going to get her to step up here. She's kind of falling asleep and drooling on me here. So basically, when you want to start the hobble training, you're going to need a few pieces of equipment. Back up. Back up. So you want to have a fairly nice long lead. I would suggest at least 12 foot. And that just gives you some space to be able to move around the horse. It allows you to keep your distance from the horse once the hobbles are actually on, especially if they're going to struggle a little bit, which most horses in the very beginning when you hobble train your horse, they do tend to struggle just a little bit. Some horses, depending on how they react to that, if you've gone through the proper groundwork, it shouldn't happen. But some horses have been known to fall over, just they don't give to that pressure at the right time and will actually kind of pull their leg out from underneath themselves. It sounds horrid, but it does happen, and the horses figure out real quick that if they just give to that pressure, that things like that don't happen. So you want a good fitting halter, whether it's rope, nylon, leather, it doesn't really matter. You just want the halter to be able to fit the horse correctly. You want a fairly long lead, so I'm using my typical 12-foot leads that I use in all my training and all my videos. And you want some kind of stick and string or a lunge whip, something that has a lash on it that you can kind of wrap around the horse's legs and kind of sack them out to things being wrapped around their legs. And then you want another piece of rope. I use my lariat just because that's what I have available to me. You could use a long lead rope and just put a loop in the end of it. You could use just a long piece of cotton rope. You know, you just need some kind of rope that you can wrap around the horse's pastern to do the next step of groundwork. So she's done the stick and string stuff lots. I do it with her every session. So basically what I mean by being able to wrap a lash or a string around their legs is simply you're just going to swing it around, and I've shown stick and string stuff in lots of other videos, and you're just going to swing it so it wraps around the horse's legs. And I do it so it goes all over their legs, so I start at the top, wrap around my forearm. Hopefully you can see here, she kind of backed up a few steps on a weird angle. So I wrap around my forearm, and obviously you want to do front legs and hind legs. Wrap around their hand bone, get around their hooves, their pastern. And obviously this is the reaction you want. Horses that aren't used to being sacked out with a stick and string might move around a little bit, and that's okay. If you go to any of my videos where I talk about sacking out, I actually like allowing the horse to move their feet a little bit if they happen to be nervous, to an extent. If they're going to take off and bolt or act like a complete lunatic, then obviously I'm not going to let them move their feet as much. But if she's just going to shuffle to the side a little bit, I'm just going to stay with her, going to keep sacking her out until she kind of stands still. And then I'm going to stop, take that pressure away, I'll rub her head, I'll rub her neck, and let her know that that's kind of the response I wanted. extra piece of rope comes into play. So same thing, you want to make sure you sack the horse out to it because I have a whole lariat here, or you can even use the end of your lead rope. I'm just going to sack her out to it. She's obviously seen this before as well. I saddled her for the first time earlier today, so she's definitely acquainted with the lariat because I've been using it to sack her out to pressure around her barrel. But I'm still going to show you guys what the process is. And I do have another video that's going to kind of show all the ways that I use my lariat in my program as well. Just in the process of editing that one. So if you're going to use a lariat for this kind of groundwork, or for any groundwork, you want to make sure you pick one that's fairly soft. So this is an extra soft, mostly because I didn't have the extra soft one I was looking for at the time that I bought this one. But you still want it to be stiff enough that it's going to hold a decent loop, because you may end up actually having to use it for roping. A lot of ranch ropes or calf ropes work really well for this because they're super soft, but they're still stiff enough to hold a good loop. Doesn't really have to be a preference on brand name or color, obviously. As long as it's soft enough that it's not going to burn up your horse if your horse happens to struggle a little bit while you're doing any kind of rope groundwork. You don't want it to burn up you, which is why I'm always wearing gloves, and you don't want it to burn up your horse. So really, I would prefer the extra soft, but I only have an extra soft, so it's going to have to do. So, now, I'm just going to show you guys with two legs, one hind leg and one front leg, but you want to go through this whole set of groundwork on all four legs, just so that the horse is prepared, obviously, because they can't comprehend information from both sides of their brain. So what you might have accomplished with, say, the right front leg, they could have a complete meltdown when you go do exactly the same thing with the left front leg. So, this exercise is pretty much called leading by the foot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up her foot, I'm going to put the loop around her pastern, and basically I'm going to try and lead her with just the rope on her foot. Other ways you can sack them out to having something around their foot is that you could just use the rope to pick up their foot, and then do it that way. I prefer actually making them move a little bit if I can with the loop around their foot. So that way, when they get to the hobble stage, they're a little bit kind of further along than if you were to just pick up and put down the foot in a stationary spot. Do right away there. So when you're doing this amount of groundwork, and you have all these ropes sitting around, you want to be sure that when you're moving around that you know exactly where your ropes are, so you yourself aren't getting tangled, and preferably you don't want your horse getting tangled either. So I'm going to keep a little bit of slack in the lead rope here. I'm still going to hold it, so she's not going to step on it and not get tangled up, or me. But I'm going to have enough slack in it that I'm not actually using the halter to ask her to step forward. I'm only going to use that as kind of a last resort to say, hey, I did actually want you to step forward. So I'm just going to, the loop's all the way around her pastern on her left front leg here. I'm just going to hold that tight, that pressure there, until she gives me that foot. Really, all I want her to do with it is just bring it forward. There we go. Once she relaxes, I'm going to put it back down. So we only moved maybe 3-4 inches further forward from where her foot was originally, but that's all I wanted. I just wanted her to give me that foot, give to the pressure of the lariat, and just move her foot a little bit. So this is a great way to teach them to take those itty-bitty little baby steps or shuffle that they're going to have to do in order to move around with hobbles on. There we go. So I'm going to reposition myself now because I'm getting a little too close to her from where I like to be for these exercises. Make sure the rope's all out of the way. I'm going to try to burn her this way so that we don't step on the string there. There, much better. And you can do all sorts of things with this exercise once the horse gets a little more advanced, if you want to use that term. You keep her safe. That was the whole reason I hobbled her in the first place, is because it was getting real dangerous for her to be scaling the walls. It was getting real dangerous for her to be scaling the walls or the fence. And as much as I don't really like hobbling horses in those kind of scenarios, I prefer hobbling them. I don't mind hobbling my horse if we're going to go trail riding, but I usually prefer not to hobble a horse with these kind of scenarios if I can help it. I'm obviously going to go through the groundwork, but her particular situation with being so herd-bound and having some separation anxiety there, the groundwork wasn't going to be able to make an effect soon enough.